Good space time, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Web3 podcast, your source for educational insights into the Web3 universe and your connection hub to discovering those that contribute to building the decentralized world. Today, we are joined by Francisco Cabana from Monero. We discuss surveillance, baby boomers, the war on privacy, and the European Convention on Human Rights. We touch upon the time banks take to settle transactions compared to crypto, the Bitcoin white paper and its importance. Finally, we talk about the blockchain surveillance industry, mitigating risks, and technological evolution. If you enjoy our podcast, please share this episode onto your favorite social platform and help us spread Web3 values into the universe.
There are more banks and federally chartered banks and credit unions in the United States than the theoretical maximum number of Dash Mastodons. So the banking industry in the United States is more decentralized. Monero is more like an innocence coin, where you totally remove the chance of surveillance. We can clear a transaction and settle it in 20 minutes worldwide. Just to give you a comparison, Visa, for example, takes 2 to 3 business days to settle actually a Visa transaction worldwide. You're going to broadcast all your financial information publicly in order to allow compliance with anti-money laundering laws. And that's utter nonsense. We're dealing with a technological evolution.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Web3 podcast. Today, I have Arctic Mine, a member from the Monero core team with me today. I'm super excited for this call. Hi, Francisco. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing really good. Very good.
Very glad to have you, considering that I've met you before, luckily, 4 or 5 years ago in CCC, right? You remember that?
Leipzig, Chaos Computer Congress in 2019 in December.
Yes, I was very excited to meet all of the Monero team back then. Well, not all, of course, but there was a lot of people there from Monero, and it was awesome. How have you been? Tell me, how have you been since then?
Well, I've been very busy. I've been doing some more work on scaling in Monero since my talk there. That's what I primarily do in the Monero community. I can speak for hours about Monero and not say the word privacy once.
Let's do it. Let's do it. We still we only have one. But let's do it.
Because basically what I do is basically design the scaling parameters of Monero so that it can be used in mass on level 1 blockchain. We can clear a transaction and settle it in 20 minutes worldwide. Just to give you a comparison, Visa, for example, takes 2 to 3 business days to settle actually a Visa transaction worldwide. And we can theoretically, depending on bandwidth, go into the thousands of transactions per second for Monero. There's no cap like in Bitcoin with the block size. It's an adapted block size. And there's a lot of tech behind it, but the bottom line is that we also have to have a tail emission or minimum emission, which allows you to secure the blockchain. And so I'm very confident that Monero has solved the scaling issue in level 1 blockchains as far as the payment currency is concerned. Now, a privacy coin, or so-called privacy coin, I hate the term because Bitcoin is the privacy coin. Let's be realistic about here. Monero is more like an innocence coin, where you totally remove the chance of surveillance. It's the toughest type of chain in which to do scaling. And the reason is because how do you fight spam? So you cannot censor spam. What you have to do is you have to price it out. And that's the difference. And so it's the toughest chain you can do scaling on, actually, the work that I do here. I can take all the formulas and we can put them into some Bitcoin clone easily. Won't work if you have a falling block reward, but that's the bottom. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and what I've been presenting in Prague is sort of a latest iteration of refinements on the Monero scaling algorithm. I can honestly say right now we're good enough. We can improve on it, but we're very much good enough where we are right now with the technology. Monero, of course, the community is working very much on full chain membership proofs. And what that basically is a proof where instead of having 16 possible signers, which you have right now in Monero, in your ring, you basically have all the transactions at a certain point in the chain as the possible signers of a transaction. So you really improve the anonymity set, and you really, and what I like to say, take away the illusion of surveillance from Monero.
I like that last illusion of surveillance. I love it. Francisco, before I let you
Yes.
we go more into Monero. I'm going to do something which is maybe be a bit unusual for a person who works for such amazing, not works for, but contributes to such a huge project and such an important project. I'm going to ask you a little bit to tell me and the listeners a little bit about your own Web3 story. How did you get into Web3? How did you start being like, how did you start loving privacy? Why is it important to you? How did you end up contributing to Monero? I want to go a little, if you can, of course.
Of course. First of all, I'm an early Bitcoin. I started with Bitcoin in 2011. I started purchasing Bitcoin when you could buy a Bitcoin for about $5.30 something Canadian. I learned about it in August of 2011. I spent a few months researching it, and I started purchasing Bitcoin in October of 2011. So I caught the tail end bear market where the price of Bitcoin crashed from $32 US to $2 US in 2011. I caught that tail end of the bear market. And I approached it very much from starting the basics. I mean, in fact, one of the things I did to prepare for this podcast was to actually review the Bitcoin white paper again, which I think is a really critical document. I'm not hearing the laughter.
It's because it's because I'm mute myself when the guest talks. So believe me.
Okay.
You can see me laughing, but you cannot hear me. But I'm definitely believe me. And for all the guests, for all the listeners out here, what's going on here is that Francisco can see me, but he cannot hear me because I'm on mute whenever he talks to hear him perfectly. Okay. But I'm bursting out already and smiling for the last 2 minutes on all this story, but I'm gonna keep the sound on. So you can hear me.
It actually makes it more interesting.
Let's make noise.
Let's make noise. But realistically, I approached Bitcoin from the objective of what's called peer-to-peer cash. I am from the last generation. I'm a baby boomer. I was born in the 1950s. And I'm the last generation that experienced cash and fungible money as the dominant form of payments.
Beautiful.
So I see the baby boomers primarily as a transitional generation from no ledger to centralized ledgers. And I make my next prediction. I say that Generation Alpha will be the transitional generation from centralized ledgers to decentralized ledgers. And this whole thing is totally driven by technological change.
You know why I'm smiling right now? Because you're talking music to my ears. This is like you're just reciting a conversation I had literally with somebody 3 hours ago about Generations Alpha and Generation X and baby boomers and how technology is differently in our brains and how it affects us different. And man, there is. No, you know what? There is something I have to ask, because if I don't ask that, it's my team. I told you, is going to kill me. They prepared like a whole set of questions for me, and to be honest, I don't think that question is so important. But I'm gonna ask it because they said if you don't ask it, they're not gonna talk to me again. So, and it's a good question. It's a good question. They say that, you know, and you say yourself that out of the core development team, there's only 2 people, well, one apart from yourself, who decided to go public. Now I don't know if Fluffy counts or not. I'm not sure if.
Well, that's the one. That's the person. That's the other person. There were 2. Ricardo Spanish, Fluffy Pony. This was in 2016. The core team has evolved, and it was a choice. You can either go public or you stay persuaded or anonymous. So that was the other one.
But the question...
I joined the core in 2016.
Aren't you afraid? That's what they're saying. How you come, you're not afraid, considering everything that's going on with Tornado Cash, with Wasabi, with everybody else, with Roman and the other Roman, and why you're not afraid?
I sat for...
How does everybody grow balls like yours? Wait, Francisco, different question. This is from me. How does everybody grow balls like yours? This is my question now.
Okay, so actually quite straightforward. It's an interesting question, I don't mind sharing. I did my homework on this. Very few cryptocurrency are as compliant, and this will shock people, as Monero. And the reason is because we're truly decentralized. If you look at the FinCEN guidance from 2013, they define a decentralized virtual currency. You cannot stick your hands in the till. And this is the big thing about Monero. You don't use the block reward to fund development, marketing, blah, 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 and virtually everybody else does that. The minute you do that, you become an MSP. That's basically what FinCEN said in 2013. Now read MiCA, and it's actually an exemption regulation on the MiCA precisely for truly decentralized virtual currencies. So that's the key secret. I would not touch something like Tornado Cash even, although Tornado Cash, simply because there's elements in there. I don't want to say there's elements in Tornado Cash that are centralized. That doesn't mean that the government has totally blown it with respect to their cases. But the fact remains that there's a flow of funds in there that comes from the actual transactions through to pay for the fees in Ethereum, that then there's a reseller who then gets the cut, goes to the developers of Tornado Cash. They also issue this other token or whatever, which is centralized token. So there are angles that they can go on there, believe it or not. They got into so there's weaknesses. Now, I'm not saying that's 100%, but Monero is pretty much on a very solid ground because of the fact that we don't stick our hands into the till, to put it blunt.
But I mean, still, whenever I talk to, over the last 4 years, I've spoken to so many founders of so-called, some of them are privacy projects, some of them, let's be honest, are so-called privacy projects. And, whenever I try to ask them, like, there hasn't been really one, and I'm sorry to say that has the same balls, and like, the question is, why is everybody so fucking afraid of like the big square, the big window, I mean, what's
They have a reason to. They have a reason to. And this is because most of those cryptocurrencies, have been blunt, are not compliant at the protocol level. I mean, this is where, if you really get down to the nitty gritty of most projects, they're doing a coin drop. That's basically a security. And I'm not going to be blunt about it. Most of them are. Even Ethereum. I mean, Ethereum, when it was launched, the Ether is not a security, in my view. But the security was just the promise to deliver the Ether was. It's kind of, I don't know if you're familiar with the very famous Highway test in the United States.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, okay. Think of the oranges in Highway. The oranges that were produced by the groves were not securities. That's the Ethereum. The investment contract was to produce the oranges. Now, if they paid the investors in oranges, which is essentially what happened in the case of Ethereum. So that's the kind of the analogy. But I give you that as an example. But pretty well every other project. There's very few projects that really do not have a pre-mine and income. And the minute you do any of that, a founder's reward, and a debt tax, you're setting yourself up for this stuff. So that's one of the main reasons. So I'll be very selective in what I'll touch. I would not touch most of the projects on the market. Bitcoin, yes. And met that requirement. So it's a bit of research. Now, granted, I mean, they're pushing the envelope with one of the arguments with Tornado Cash is that they're pushing the envelope very much on the custodial mixes and all that. Non-custodial and all these issues. There's a lot of legal issues here. I mean, I spent 4 weeks during the Sterlingoff trial. I was actually working for the defense. Didn't end up testifying, but for a variety of reasons. But I was actually spent a lot analyzing that trial. And one of the biggest problems that we have today with cryptocurrency, and I'll tell you what it is right now, and that's the root cause of the issue with Tornado Cash, of the issue with Samurai Wallet, and all these other guys,
Yes.
is this business of blockchain surveillance.
It's a huge fucking business.
Now, blockchain, it's a huge multi-billion-dollar business.
Yes.
Here's the bottom line. It does not work on Bitcoin.
Why?
Read the Bitcoin white paper, because what you're doing is you have flow of funds does not equal flow of control. And it says it right in the Bitcoin white paper. They break the link. And so you create plausible deniability at best, or a high degree of error at worst. What that does, and let me backtrack for a second. I did not get involved in Monero in 2014 and 2015 about privacy. No, that's not the reason I got involved with Monero. I got involved with Monero because of scaling. This shocks people because I tell people, when you're working for a privacy project or so-called privacy, and and the reason I got involved was with scaling. That was my biggest concern with Bitcoin. Privacy you can add to a chain. In fact, Monero's proven that in a big way. Bitcoin has done it with things like Taproot. Scaling you can't, and without getting into real consensus problems, and that's the biggest distinction. So when people are saying that you can surveil the Bitcoin blockchain or call Bitcoin a surveillance coin, that's a wrong mistake. Bitcoin is a privacy coin. And it says it right in the white paper, how it does privacy. And what you do is you anonymize the public key. That's the whole concept of Bitcoin. You have an anonymous public key. Your typically private public key cryptography involves a public key that's not anonymous. The innovation in Bitcoin was to make the public key anonymous. That's the fundamental source of privacy in Bitcoin. Now, what these blockchain surveillance companies are saying is, well, we can discern somehow through our proprietary algorithm that the person who made that transaction is person X, who then we're going to accuse of a crime. Well, let me tell you how this works. If you sell Bitcoin privately that you have a KYC to back to yourself, you do not know where that Bitcoin is going to go. You're going to be accused. It's a matter of time. You will be accused of a serious crime or act of terrorism, sanctions evasion, whatever you want to say, that you have absolutely nothing to do with.
But this is an interesting thing you say, because what scared me during Roman's, like what scared me the most after Roman's trial was the quote, and I'll try to quote it, but I'm sorry if I cannot quote it correctly, but I'll try to quote. And what the judge said, that he's basically, the Dutch judge, if I'm not mistaken, said that basically Roman is guilty of everything that happened on the web, of all the crimes. I was laughing because I was saying, well, basically they are saying to kids, don't go work, become a criminal, because it is much better to be a terrorist or whatever it is, but don't build for them a platform, because if you do, you're the guilty one. They're not guilty, you're guilty because you facilitated them to do the crimes. And that's scary as shit.
Of course it is. But here's the issue. European jurisprudence, and last year, they have the concept of proportionality. It's very strong in European jurisprudence. And what that means is, and this is really important, is that you have to have a balance between the questions. So is there a need for privacy? And so what that judge is trying to say, that there's no counterbalance use of Tornado Cash, which is complete nonsense. This is why I really believe that that's going to be a major appeals issue. In fact, blockchain surveillance, in my opinion, is going to end up in a brutal challenge, and in Europe, it's going to end up as a serious violations, or it's called interference, this is the proper term, with the European Convention on Human Rights. And by the way, I did a bit amount of research on this. And although there's no specific issue in financial privacy, there's tons of interferences over blockchain surveillance. And essentially what the judge had to argue is that there was no legitimate use for Tornado Cash in order to sidestep the issue of proportionality. That's where that's coming from. So this is why, in many ways, it's forcing the issue into these extreme positions, because what's happening is you have to totally negate privacy. The source of the problem is the idea that you can do KYC compliance by surveilling the blockchain. So instead of learning about your customer, which is what a bank or exchange should be doing. I mean, I trade between Monero and Canadian dollars through a fully compliant KYC exchange. It's a private, actually, OTC desk that I use. And I deal with my banker, who is well aware of the fact that I'm invested in Monero. So that's not the problem. You can have compliance and a super secure private blockchain. What you cannot do is expect that you can surveil the blockchain to determine criminality and then expect to have privacy at the same time. Well, it's not going to be possible. It's like saying we're going to have law enforcement walking around neighborhoods, looking into people's windows to see if crimes have been committed. And then if people put curtains in there, are basically obstructing law enforcement.
It reminds me of the meme where a policeman on a bike stops a car and he says, "Sir, you've been speeding. Here is your ticket." And then the writing underneath. This is when you know it's not about the speeding. It's not about safety. When a guy on a bicycle stops you that doesn't have even a seat belt, and the guy who stops you and tells you, "Hey, you've been speeding. You don't have a seat belt on." Well, we all understand that it's not about that. We all understand what it's about. It's about control. And what I'm trying to get at here is that I'm afraid that compliance is never going to be enough, because for people who chase, not you, but for the ones who are trying to make people compliant, it's not about that they expect, they're not waiting for the moment debit and credit is going to be settled. They don't care about the debit and the credit and the $600 or whatever it is else that they are putting on. Not in my opinion. In my opinion, what they care about is control. What they care about is really putting people and scaring them to the point of when those people do exactly how it was during COVID or 1945 or whatever, or 1942, whatever. That doesn't matter. It's all the same mass experiment in my eyes. What I'm trying to understand is so let's say somebody like yourself chooses to be perfectly compliant and does everything legally, but how can he be sure that tomorrow the U.S. Federal government or I don't know, doesn't else say, hey, well, you know what? Actually, everything you've been doing was illegal. We don't care that you were compliant.
Well, you're going to go into the dealing. Are you dealing with a certain issues such as post facto law, etc.? I mean, sure, you could turn the thing into a complete dictatorship. But it's very interesting. I mean, you talk about the 1940s in Europe, and of course the implication. Those were cash societies. And that's the scary part, if you think about it for a moment. I mean, that was a cash society. And just imagine what can happen if you have the centralized ledger surveillance. So these are technical issues.
Of course.
These are issues which are much broader. Sure, there are elements within law enforcement and within government that say what you're saying, and I don't disagree with that. But there's also checks and balances there. You can't just totally throw it out. And the problem that we're dealing with here is that you got a bunch of companies that have done a sales job on government. So it's a lot more transactional than people realize it is. Created an industry and said, we can know your transaction instead of know your customer. And that's why we're seeing this war on privacy. You can have know your customer. You can provide information privately to a bank or an exchange. You can have a government regulate how they use that information. Yes, it's not ideal, but that is not the same as broadcasting the whole information on a public blockchain in order for some company to surveil it and then discern inaccurately that you're guilty of a crime you didn't commit.
Of course.
So we're dealing with two very different things here. Yes, you can have a government that throws out the Constitution. And I understand where you're coming from. I mean, I was driving back with a friend of mine from the United States into Canada, and I sort of made a vile reference to Trump. And I said, well, I feel like I am driving from Germany into Austria in 1937, you know? And it's like, what? You say that? You know, this guy's 20 years my senior. And it was an interesting comment, but what I was referring to implicitly is the unconstitutionality or the threats of dictatorship. Yes, there is a risk of dictatorship. Absolutely. Yes, there is a risk of totally throwing out the checks and balances in democratic societies. This has happened, and it can happen. I've seen countries evolve both ways. I even visited Spain during Franco. I was a teenager at the time. And that was an absolute fascist country. I'd been there. And so you could feel the tension. This is 1972, 1971. So I'm well aware of that. But this is not what we're talking about. We're not talking a complete collapse of society, destroying democracy, destroying the checks and balances, which a lot of people are really worried about, with reason. Yeah, I know what I'm saying. I'm talking much more basic stuff here. And yes, you do need to break surveillance with a dictatorship with the kind of centralized ledgers would be much more draconian than anything that happened in the past. But that's a technological problem. It's not a political problem.
You know, I was speaking to one of the very few, in my opinion, dudes who is quite a very good engineer to do with privacy as well. And it's a guy who's building, his name is Chris Goes. They're building a project called Namada, whatever you want to call it. And he said an interesting point. And I'm going to derive a question to you from that point. He when we started talking about privacy, he made a point that there is a big confusion about semantics and what does privacy in general mean. Because somebody peeking into my window and seeing me do something in the house today is considered privacy, and financial data flowing on chain is also considered privacy. And from that, he said that we as a society probably not his statement, but he says probably it makes a confusion, and I kind of agree. And here's my question: do you think that if we started rebranding, let's say, I'm gonna kind of joke about it, but rebranding the dark web, and call it the free net, I don't know, or Monero calling frontier net, I don't know, whatever. I mean, unicorns and flowers. Do you think that people would start looking at privacy differently? Because today it seems that people look at it as a sin.
Well, basically what has happened, and this is where the issue is if you look at the history of the analogy of the curtains, if you have a law enforcement approach to law enforcement, which involves law enforcement surveilling people's homes and peeping into their windows to see if crimes have been committed, and someone sells opaque curtains, like I got right behind me because I sleep right next to. That's an opaque curtain. I should put a privacy filter.
I have one too. It's good.
But my point is, then suddenly you become you're obstructing law enforcement. The problem is that you're going about it the wrong way. And what's occurred in the blockchain is that you had a bunch of companies, and the governments did not ask for this. Let's not kid ourselves. They were asking for the standard stuff that they've been doing for years with things such as travel rule and know your customer and all this kind of stuff. And they say, no, you don't need to do all this. We can tell you where the criminals are. Just let us surveil the blockchain. And they bought the Kool-Aid, or they drank the Kool-Aid. That's the bottom line here. This is why we have this war on privacy and a head-on collision with compliance. It's not a question of KYC is perfectly compliant with blockchain privacy. You provide your information to the banking institution or to the exchange privately. You don't have to broadcast it at the exchange. Any more than if you go and set up a bank account and you provide information to or a tenant, for example. I mean, it's funny. Provides information to a landlord. I'm a landlord. I own property. That information, they don't have to broadcast that information publicly and put it everywhere, and then have someone surveil it so that I can get it. No, they provide it privately to the landlord, and there's laws both in Canada and European Union and that says what you can and cannot do with that information. And there's checks and balances in the system. What you've done with blockchain surveillance is you've suddenly says, no, if you're on a blockchain, if you're on Web3, you're going to broadcast all your financial information publicly in order to allow compliance with anti-money laundering laws. And that's utter nonsense. And this is driven by the blockchain surveillance industry.
Well, a question then. Well, because I feel like, for example, I have, apart from blockchain people who are committing to building blockchain, I have different guests on. And for example, sometimes I recently had a guy who is a libertarian, author.
A libertarian.
Yes, author. His name is Derek Wills, and a fantastic guy. And his question was to me, why are you bringing me on? And I said, well, because I want people who build in Web3 to fucking listen to you and to understand how to input those values into their projects before they start building them. So my question to you is this, like, how do we today, as people who have been in this industry for 10, 15, whatever, okay, 15 not, but soon to be 15 years, and we want this to continue and we want this to grow, we dedicated, for me, for you, maybe not as much as for me, but imagine me, I'm nearly 40, so for me, nearly 15 years is almost, okay, it's not half, but almost, dedicating to this. And like, I don't want to see this go, because I understand as well as you that this blockchain, and we had this conversation in 2019 briefly about Windows and surveillance and how it's going to grow. And we were right. It has grown beyond largest expectations. How to fucking stop this? Where is the...
And I love the libertarian example, because here's the fundamental reason why Bitcoin has failed. It's got nothing to do with government. And one of the biggest problems that I have, if you're a statist and you blame the government for something, okay, you accept your responsibility. If you're a libertarian and you blame the government for something, there's a real risk that you're not accepting your responsibility. The reason Bitcoin has failed is an engineering reason. It's not a political reason. It's because it was designed to fail because it couldn't scale properly. People couldn't use it. And you're not going to replace Visa that does 65,000 transactions a second with a blockchain that is limited at 6.5 transactions a second. That's just not going to happen. Which is why I ditched Bitcoin in 2014 and 2015 for Monero. And it cannot do this. So we've got to stop for a second here and ask ourselves, okay, we've designed a coin. If you want to design something that can do what it's supposed to do. So you want to do a project that's a Web3 decentralized. Is it decentralized? Can it actually be mass used? If people can't use it, then your project has a serious engineering design flaw. If the problem is that technology hasn't caught up with it, that's fine. Design it in such a way that it can accept technological change. But since, and by the way, it's only been 15 years, since 2009, when the Bitcoin block, Genesis block was mined, 1 megabyte, it's like 500 megabytes today. And they're still stuck on this. Well, this is the fundamental issue here. And so you can't blame the government for something that's just bad engineering, and that's my point. Yeah, but this is the issue in the Bitcoin community. This is the first problem. I mean, I remember Amir Taki, and he actually was he made a post in 2012 in Bitcoin Talk, and he talked about how Bitcoin will help people living in squats, i.e. people experiencing homelessness. He was right. But there's a big method at that. Okay, so then I looked at this. This is very interesting. How many people in the world are at risk of experiencing homelessness? It's probably 10% of the world's population is. Then you do the math. Can the Bitcoin blockchain accommodate this? No. So you gotta look at, so it's not solving the problem. It's not addressing the problem if a minuscule fraction can only use the product.
We had Amir Taki on some years ago as well, of course.
Yes.
And we talked digital dictatorship with him, and basically it's interesting to understand that the views are the same, but for some reason, like there is this very small bunch of people in the industry who seems to have interest in developing decentralized structures. When I say decentralized, I mean real decentralized structures. I don't mean decentralized because it's written decentralized on it. And it seems, well, what I'm trying to understand as somebody who has been committing a lot of his time, all of his time to this industry for the last, I said almost 15 because I meant for myself, because I also started 2011, 12. So it's still not 15 for me. But, you know, I didn't start to dedicate my life since 2011 or 12, of course, to blockchain. Of course not. It was about 2015 when I started really, really deep into it. And seeing that all the time, like, you know, seeing people and hearing people like yourself, like Amir, like some people who, like Derek Wills, for example, like seeing some people who still have those balls and still fighting for it and still saying, hey, no matter what, I don't care if they're gonna like blah blah blah, I don't know, do courts or peep into my windows. I'm still gonna try and find possibilities where I didn't fail, where I, like you said, it was a perfect example with statism and a libertarian. Of course, as a libertarian, yeah, I kind of laugh and blame the government, but I don't really think the government is guilty. I know they're guilty. I'm an anarchist. I don't expect the government to do anything for me. I do it myself. Of course, I'm not expecting them to build me a fucking road. But how do we do that? How do we achieve it here? How do we?
But here, my point is that you might think if you know the government is guilty. That's not the issue.
Oh no, I don't.
But my point is, if you can address the problem yourself, that's what you need to be doing. So I looked at the problem and I said, okay, what can I do about this?
I hear you.
Well, you need to have proper scaling.
I hear you.
So then I go, and the Monero project, they're all focused on privacy. Someone wants to do something and nobody else is really interested in scaling.
I hear you.
And they welcome me with open arms. Fine, I'm going to do it here. And then I'm going to design it so that people can actually use it. That was my point. And so you design the technology so it can be used. Then you're going to have a social impact. But if you design a technology that only a minuscule fraction of people can use, you will not have a social impact. It's that simple. It's got nothing to do with the government.
I hear you.
And this is why I have control over my own actions. I don't have control over somebody else's. So what can I do about it? That's the question that one needs to ask yourself. And you've got to design a project, and you're going to work with a project that is willing to accept the fact that it can be mass used. And that's my point. I understand the technology. Sorry.
Now that no. God, don't say that. It's just like
no.
Don't say sorry, please. Don't say sorry.
No. Yeah, no. But here's my point about this: is that you've got to design the thing so people can actually use it. If people can't use it, there's no point. Now I understand that Web3 is still in its infancy, and believe me, doing smart contracts and putting NFTs on blockchains is way more complicated than basic payments. And basic payments is tough enough. But we're dealing with a technological evolution. And this is the point that we need to understand. The technological change that has driven centralized ledgers. Like for millennia, humans have had fungible currency. Whether it's gold, whether it's bills, whether it's tally sticks, whether it's people have used all sorts of things, but they basically dealt with bearer instruments till the 1960s, 1970s, and this is why I said I was the last generation. Baby was the last generation that saw this transition from the no ledger to the central ledgers. And I think there are three generations: Gen X, Gen Y, Millennial, and
Alpha.
Gen Z.
Alpha as well.
No, Alpha's the next one.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, Alpha is not Gen Z. Alpha is after Gen Z. So you got Generation X, after Baby Boomer, Gen X, Gen Y, Millennial, Gen Z, and then we'll go to Gen Alpha. So the Gen Alphas are people in there right now in the
2013 and plus, 2013.
Yeah,
plus.
yeah. That I think of them as a COVID generation. I lived next to an elementary school, and I saw in COVID all these kids lining up, just like I did 50 years prior, but with a little difference, we'll all be sprayed with hand sanitizer. That's a seminal generation, by the way. But it's really interesting. But that's what I'm talking, Gen Alpha. So someone would have been in elementary school in 2019, in 2020. They're going to be the transition into the decentralized ledger. And this is driven by technology. This is not driven by government, by policy, by any of that. It's a technological aspect. So when we design a project, we've got to design it so it can accept this technological change. I mean, when I was at Monero, I got my fiber optic installed just after I got back from Leipzig. That was about the time that it was installed.
I really in a sense, like what you're saying. You're saying, look at yourself and see what you can do. I, for example, started to work on scalability of payments. Now, okay, here is another question. And again, I'm playing kind of devil's advocate here, but I want to hear your opinions, and not just me. I want people to hear what you say, you know? Okay, so for example, I am a bare metal validator. We are a self-privately owned bare metal validator with Starlink, solar panels, and you know we are the, how to say, the creme de la creme for some. But I can tell you that I talked to a lot of bare metal validators. We just started to be bare metal. It took us a lot of time to progress because I wanted everything to be pretty, and it's very fucking expensive, by the way. But whatever. Just to set up. I mean, to set beautifully with all the hops and all the privacy and security. Now, I can tell you and tell you that almost everybody I talk to now, I have some balls. I like to think so, at least. But I can tell you that, you know, like you say, well, what can you do? Do something today. And for example, today I can tell you that validators are fucking even scared to run a privacy-based project. I'm not even talking Monero. I'm not even talking about Monero, because Monero is like up here, and here is the, like, you know, privacy projects that I'm kind of talking about. And people are scared to run them as validators. They're scared to contribute.
The issue there, again, I mean,
they have no balls.
But proof of work is a lot safer than proof of stake. Because essentially, I mean, I had some very interesting analysis back in 2014, whether or not Dash masternodes, for example, were considered decentralized or not. Well, it turns out, and I know many Dash people are going to say this, but that there are more banks and federally chartered banks and credit unions in the United States than the theoretical maximum number of Dash masternodes. So the banking industry in the United States is more decentralized than this so-called decentralized currency.
I love this comparison. That was beautiful.
I mean, come on. This is the stuff that I'm getting at. And we've got to be realistic about this stuff. Like, if you're looking at validation in chains such as Ethereum.
But how can we get more if they're all scared? How are we going to get more?
The reason, I mean, I don't know if I'd be comfortable being a validator for something like Ethereum, to be honest.
I understand why.
Because this is the reason why. I mean, you got to look at what the law says. You got to actually, you know, I had a really interesting experience when I was a kid, and my parents went to the United States and they didn't have a visa. And they let us in, and they were very nice about it. And the travel agent misled us. But that when I was traveling, we were traveling in a Spanish passport. So this is in the 70s. And the agent said me a very simple thing. The place you need to learn about what the law is, get it straight from the government. If you want to find out what the government is saying, start by reading what they're putting out. Actually read the guidance. Actually read the legislation. Actually read this stuff. And then instead of making assumptions, and then you'll know whether you're standing on good foot or not, or at least you can mitigate your risk. There's a lot of stuff I wouldn't touch. It's about being smart about it. So you got to say, okay, do I want to deal with a project that has an airdrop? No, I don't want to be involved with that. So I can see where people are. Then you throw privacy into it.
Of course, they're selling themselves.
And then it becomes more of a target. But the truth of the matter is that if you get down to the nitty gritty, you've got to read the law. You've got to read what it says. If you're a validator, how does that start to be different from banking? At what point do you draw the line that you're just approving transactions? At what point do we draw the line when you have a proof of stake coin? I don't want to start picking on proof of stake. I'm not a big fan of it. I've argued, in fact, that proof of stake has to be state regulated. But realistically, with proof of stake coins, what happens is you have a minimum, typically, and then it leads to people depositing money with a trusted third party. We're now back into banks again, which need to be regulated, which in turn then becomes a bank and an MSV. So now they're subject to regulation and they're an obliged entity in the United States, in Europe, in so then they got the KYC and all this other stuff. So now you've opened yourself a whole can of worms. So yes, there's things you can do that are decentralized, but it's a very high standard. And I don't know if you read the 2013 FinCEN guidance, which in my opinion was a seminal document on Bitcoin. But it set a really, really high standard for decentralized virtual currency. And very few projects actually meet. In fact, I can count it with the fingers on my hand. Bitcoin, Dogecoin, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, Monero. Very few.
I wanna ask you, because I know that I can definitely talk. Well, but I want to ask you a little bit about Monero because I will be killed by a lot of people if I don't.
Okay.
And I would love to talk about privacy for the next 5 hours, to be honest. And I want to just talk about privacy. I want to make it all privacy, but I have to ask something about Monero. And I'm going to ask two basic things because of the time limit. But the first one is kind of silly and easy, but it's easy. In your opinion, apart from, of course, privacy and scalability, considering, in my opinion, Monero has solved privacy, right? So privacy is not really an issue for Monero to solve, but of course there can be improvements.
Wait a minute, it is. Big time. Okay, let's continue.
So the question is, what are the biggest issues that can be faced by Monero apart from scalability and privacy in the future, like, I don't know, 5, 10, or whatever, 15 years?
Well, I mean, from a technical perspective, I think it's an incredible position because we have addressed the other problem, which is the issue of the following block reward. One of the problems with Bitcoin is that Bitcoin has this idea that fees can replace transaction block rewards. Monero said, no, we have a minimum tail emission, so we've addressed that problem. That's been solved. So that's not an issue. I think Monero is getting very close. Well, I would argue Monero right now is good enough, but they can be improved upon. Basically, the main changes that's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, 2 years, I think, is going to be what's called full chain membership proofs, some refinements on scaling. There's the Seraphis project, which is going to allow for some transaction types. The view keys are a bit finicky in Monero right now. They need to be cleaned up. So a few things like that. There are technical issues that are being addressed by the project, but the project is getting very close to maturity and very close to a point where it really can go on for a long time. The biggest obstacle that we have right now is this nonsense of blockchain surveillance. It's this idea that and that's kind of what's getting in the way, slowing it down. It's essentially kept a lid on Monero because it's being pushed out of a lot of exchanges. But I don't believe that has a solid legal basis, and it's going to get challenged in the courts. I mean, if you look at all the cases, the Tornado Cash case and the Samurai Wallet, and even the previous one, Roman Stolinoff with Bitcoin Fog, these things are going to get appealed. And I don't think it's going to be pretty for a lot of the blockchain surveillance people. It's going to happen on appeal. So that's where I see the situation there happening. For the future of Monero, I think it's kind of out of the picture kind of thing, which is a nice thing. You can grow in sort of the picture, but those are the changes that are occurring. But it's a project that is getting to the point where it's getting very close to good enough. I would argue it's good enough. But like I said, we can do better, and it's been improved. But that's the point we're at.
Do you think I have a weird question here, which I wasn't? Mm-hmm. I don't think I didn't have. Not gonna have time for it, but I will. So I have a couple more there. It's a tricky question. I like it though. It's also from my team. Do you think that cash and barter are a viable alternative for Monero in terms of privacy and scalability?
Well, they're a complement. They're complementary.
Perfect.
I mean, they're not replacement. This is the other thing that people fail to understand. There are situations when the fiat banking system does a very good job. If you're a millionaire paying a billionaire, credit cards are great in your same country. I am serious about this. I'm serious. If you're a millionaire paying a billionaire in your same country, credit cards do a phenomenal job.
It's also beautiful.
If you're a millionaire paying a billionaire in another country, in a different currency, they start to fail. If you're a poor person trying to get paid or paying with debit, they completely start to fail. If you combine 1 and 2, if you have poor people in country A paying poorer people in country B in different currencies, i.e. remittances, that's the strongest point for something like Monero. So it's not a complete replacement for the banking system. I would never say that. It's a complement. Whether cash and barter are certainly part of it, so is gold. In fact, here's an interesting thing about gold. Number of grams, a US currency bill weighs 1 gram. It's about 31 grams are a troy ounce. Once the price of gold goes over $3,120, gold by weight will be a lighter store of value than paper cash.
Makes sense.
That's a great change. Keep in mind that paper cash was designed initially to be a lighter store of value than gold.
There is another store of value. I'm going to make a joke here, of course, but there is another store of value to cash. If you have 10 million or let's say 100 million in US dollars in small or preferably 10s, 20s, 5s banknotes, you also happen to possess about 5 to 10 kilograms of cocaine, which is also very good for storing value. So because
if you can extract it from, but you got to extract the cocaine from the currency.
Yes, you have
this is the gold extraction. Yes. This is the gold problem. It's actually a very interesting concept. This is the gold issue because what you have to do is extract the cocaine from the currency, and that's not cheap.
No, not cheap.
No, seriously. I don't think anybody's figured that one out. But that is actually what gold is about. Is that it's very dilute, incredibly plentiful, but very dilute and very expensive to extract. So that's the economy of gold right there. But that's an interesting one.
It was one I had to do. But Francisco, kind of like the last question on Monero. I mean, you are by far like, I don't know. I've only met you once in real life, but talking to you for 3-4 days. Not that we spent all 3-4 days talking. You had things to do, but I was very impressed in terms of the way you spoke about privacy and obviously the way you spoke about technology. And you are the person working on the scalability currently of the biggest, or if not the only, privacy project out there. What can others like today, apart, I don't mean philosophically, I mean really physically. I don't mean looking at yourself and working on a good project, like physically. Can somebody go there and contribute today somehow if somebody's listening to it by chance? I don't know.
Okay, my comment on contributing to a project is very simple. Find something that you love to do and that nobody else in the project is really interested in doing. Great way to contribute.
Don't build blockchain surveillance fucking things on top of Monero, people. That is not what Francisco is saying.
No. Okay, let me tell you, people have tried to do that. There's a company actually. Oh, by the way, I should let you know that I'm actually legally certified in blockchain surveillance of one of the blockchain surveillance companies.
There we go. Beautiful. It's getting better and better.
That actually came out. I actually have the actual certification. A lot of these people have.
You need to know your enemy. You need to know your enemy.
It's kind of like it was very. And what was interesting, when I was taking the certification, there was a fair number of law enforcement people in the seminar, and they were obsessed with Monero. how can we do? And the guy says, well, we can just give you a probability. Yeah, I know.
How do we arrest you? How do we arrest all of you? Come on. Yeah.
No, but realistically, it is. But if you look at it from the perspective of a law enforcement person, they're being sold a bill of goods. To be honest, in my opinion, the blockchain surveillance companies have sold governments a bill of goods. And in every case where you sell someone a bill of goods, you have a willing buyer. It's so appealing. I mean, all you have to do is punch money into a computer and they tell you where the criminal is.
There was
You're a police officer. That's actually very appealing.
Press enter.
It just happens not to work.
No. And ironically, like I would like to, because everybody listening to this, you guys can see all the show notes of everything we mentioned. And there is a movie I'm going to mention on purpose because I don't remember the name of it, but we will find it and we will put it in the show notes. It was a movie about exactly what Francisco is talking about. It was a movie about the guys trying to predict crimes by some crazy things, and it didn't fucking work, guys. That's the story. It doesn't fucking work because if it's not happened, it might not happen. So
yeah, there's a lot of danger in that because it's all these people, they sell the algorithms. There's an appeal to it because it makes it easy. It's kind of like it's a shortcut. Instead of having to do, hard work as an investigator, as a detective, and actually solve a crime, you don't have this magical software that's going to do it for you. And so it becomes, but it's also very dangerous because it's going to catch a lot of innocent people. This is why the whole thing is going to end up in a clash between civil liberties, human rights. In Europe, I said it's the Charter, the European Convention the European Convention of Human Rights. In the United States, it's going to be the United States Constitution, likely the First and Fourth Amendments. In Canada, it'd be the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You can go right all the world, even things like the Magna Carta in British common law. I mean, we're dealing. You have to go back a long time to this issue. It's gonna come to a head in the courts. That's my prediction on this issue.
I must say, last note, you are more optimistic than me. But from that, I will go to a quiz. I'm gonna do a shorter version of the quiz with you because I think your answers are gonna be at least they're interesting to me, and I'm sure that a lot of people who are listening to this will also like to hear them. So the quiz is quite simple, silly couple of questions. First one is, give me either a book or a movie or a song that has been with you throughout all your life and it has had a positive influence on what you do in your life.
That one is easy. George Orwell's 1984.
I knew you were going to say that.
Now, I will say something about Orwell that Orwell got wrong.
Windows?
No. The telescreens will be carried in people's
pockets. Yes. They're not going to be on the screen.
But yes, Windows is actually Apple's worse. At one point, Windows was worse. But yeah, George Orwell's 1984 is a really interesting book, particularly if you look at it from a technical perspective. If I wanted to, I've done land administration and land work. And if I was working for Big Brother in the Ministry of Love and wanted to set up the telescreens using modern technology, I would use iPads and just mount them on the wall.
Of course. And I by the way, just
I would avoid anything that's GPLv3 like the plague.
That's a nice comment. And by the way, I have used your example to explain on this podcast about that what you just said several times. So it's been heard several times. Second question, Francisco. Give me one project. Please don't say Monero, Dogecoin, Litecoin, or anything you already mentioned. Give me a privacy project that you personally might not think that it's going to build and succeed, but you find it technologically interesting to watch and follow.
Okay, an example would be Zcash.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why it has a problem. The technology is actually very good. The privacy technology is very good. It's inherited all the scaling problems of Bitcoin. And in fact, there were spam attacks. People criticize Zcash because of their privacy technology. You have the ceremony. In my opinion, that's funnable, but that's not a big issue. Their privacy technology is actually very good. The fact that you have to do the ceremony, that's not the issue with Zcash. Zcash's problem is that they've inherited all the scaling and failures of Bitcoin. They were spam attacked quite badly for the same reason. Because basically they have no pricing on their privacy technology. So that's the failure of that. But that's more a failure of Bitcoin than anything else.
I understand. I
But
see
their
where you're
privacy
coming
technology is
from. I
phenomenal.
see where you're coming from. I agree.
It's like you build a great time privacy technology on a really shaky blockchain. That's essentially the issue.
Okay, one more. This is going to be slightly weird, but I hope it works for you. Can you share one motivational thing that you happen to you, or you do on daily or weekly basis that keeps Francisco concentrated on scalability, privacy, and decentralization?
Very simple. This is a very simple issue. Paying the poor.
Okay.
Now, if you get into this, it's really interesting. If you look at every value system, religion, spirituality, across the world, across developed countries, developing countries, Aboriginal, First Nations, whatever you want to say, giving alms to the poor is a virtuous act. Now, for millennia, we've had fundamental amounts of money where you can pay the poor. You could give a poor person an ounce of gold or a bit or money. But try paying a person who is experiencing homelessness with a debit card. That is a fundamental problem of the last 50 years. We have created a form of currency as the dominant paying system that makes it impossible to do what humans have considered for millennia to be a highly virtuous act, which is paying the poor.
I totally understand what you're saying. It's a weird thing to comprehend, I guess, for a lot of people, and a lot of people are.
Now, I'll give you a very experience. I agree. Very experience that I had. This was in 2013. At the time, I was in my 50s. My friend was a millennial. He was in his 20s. We're walking in Prince George, down in central northern British Columbia. A Gen Xer approached us. He asked for money. He begged. I didn't give him any money. I didn't make eye contact. I said, I don't have any money. Well, I don't work it. My millennial friend said something that really stuck with me. I only have debit.
I'm sorry, I'm a crypto millionaire.
Honestly, this is like the bottom line. I'm a very successful crypto. I'm a crypto millionaire. I don't deny it. But this is essentially you see, crypto. You can give them crypto. That's the issue. That's the problem. No. Yeah, because actually all he needs is a QR code, and in fact, in 2012, people were giving Bitcoin to homeless people in the United States. There's some projects that are actually doing that. So that's not a problem. That's exactly the problem it solves. But you can't do it with a debit card.
I have to remember that one. Francisco, last one. I promise. Last one, and I've done torturing you. I promise. So
I'm torturing you. We're having a lot of fun.
No, I'm kidding. Of course, I'm kidding. I'm loving this. I want this to go on forever, but I cannot. So, one more, last one, and this is a bit of a weird one, like the previous one, but I like this one. Dead or alive? Real or comics cartoon or a family member or an author or a coder or a writer, doesn't matter from which book, doesn't matter from which life, from which reality. Not a guru, because I don't personally believe in gurus and I don't advertise on gurus, but a person or a character who you sometimes in life look at them and you think, okay, yeah, this is the right thing to do. Like, and you do not God, not guru, by no means. Somebody who has some positive influence on you throughout your life, and you look up to them sometimes when you're down.
Well, I mean, if I was going to look at a living person who's now dead, it would be Mother Teresa of Calcutta,
Okay, strong.
who helped a very strong-willed person. But with one thing that struck me about her comment, which really is in called City of Joy, and she said quite categorically that she could feed a homeless, hungry person for 60% of what the government would spend on doing the same thing. That was, I thought, well, 66%, something like that. She was talking about the Indian government. But it's an interesting example. You have to be efficient in charity, which is one thing I think is really important. You have to, if you're going to give charity to people, it's not just about yourself. It's about making sure it works for the person that you're giving it to.
Of course.
That was a good example of somebody who has had an influence on me, I would say.
It's a strong answer. I like it. Francisco, I want to thank you. You're a fascinating speaker, and I want to thank you for all your answers.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
I would please don't hang up just yet. This is just goodbye for the recording because I still have a couple of things to ask you. So thank you very much, and thank you everybody for tuning in and listening to this. Thanks, people. Bye.
Hi.
This content was created by the Citizen Web3 Validator. You may support our work by delegating to any of our nodes.